Hello, welcome to Know Bible for Self. Today we are plunging into one of the most foundational and epic narratives of the entire Bible, the story of Moses. Tracing his life from the basket in the Nile to his life-altering encounter at the burning bush. The life of Moses is a profound theological roadmap of divine providence, preparation, human failure, and ultimate redemption. It is the story of how God takes a reluctant, flawed man and uses him to deliver an entire nation. Moses' life is neatly divided into three 40-year segments, each serving as a distinct phase of God's training for the impossible task ahead: 40 years in Pharaoh's palace, 40 years in the Midian desert, and 40 years leading Israel. Today, we focus on the first two, culminating in his divine commissioning. Part 1, the first 40 years in the palace. Exodus 1-2. The story of Moses begins in the crushing reality of slavery in Egypt. After for centuries of growth, the descendants of Jacob had become so numerous that a new pharaoh, fearing their power, enacted brutal policies to stop their increase, culminating in a genocidal decree. 1. Birth and divine providence. The pharaoh commanded that all newborn Hebrew boys be thrown into the Nile River. It is into this terrifying world that Jacob and Amram gave birth to a beautiful boy. The courage of faith. For 3 months, the parents hid the child. When they could hide him no longer, Jacob performed one of the most profound acts of faith in the Bible. She constructed a small basket of reeds, waterproofed it with bitumen and pitch, and placed the infant inside. This humble basket was, in effect, a tiny ark, a biblical echo of Noah's ark, a vessel of salvation set adrift on the chaotic waters of judgment. The miraculous rescue: the baby was placed among the reeds near the bank where Pharaoh's own daughter was bathing. The princess, upon finding the child, immediately recognized he was a Hebrew baby. However, Moses' older sister, Miriam, displayed quick thinking and courage. She approached the princess and offered to find a Hebrew woman to nurse the baby. The ultimate insider secret: Miriam brought the baby's own mother, Jacob, back to the palace. Jacob was then paid a wage by the royal house to nurse and raise her own son until he was old enough to be adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. This insider secret shows God's perfect providence. Moses was raised by his own mother, receiving foundational Hebrew identity and faith, while being paid for it by the very regime that wanted him dead. 2. The education of a prince. Moses was named Moshe, meaning drawn out, because he was drawn out of the water and grew up in the highest courts of the Egyptian empire. Acquisition of knowledge. The Bible doesn't detail his education, but Acts 7-22 states that Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and action. This education was the pro-tip for his later calling. He learned language, leadership, administration, engineering, and military strategy, all skills necessary to confront and defeat the greatest empire on earth. The moral lesson: the first 40 years were about preparation. God placed his chosen deliverer in the home of the enemy, equipping him with the knowledge and status of a prince. Moses possessed the skills of a king, but not yet the character of a shepherd. Part 2, the second 40 years. The failure and the desert exile. Exodus 2. At the age of 40, Moses faced a crisis of identity, leading to a catastrophic failure that derailed his life for 4 decades. 3. The impulsive act of justice. Moses finally acknowledged his Hebrew identity. He went out among his own people and saw their suffering. The murder: he witnessed an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. Moses looked around, saw no one, and impulsively killed the Egyptian, hiding the body in the sand. This revealed a man of passion, justice, and action, but one who was relying on human strength and timing, not God's. The common mistake was attempting to force God's deliverance with human violence. The rejection: the very next day, Moses tried to mediate a fight between 2 Hebrew men. One of them rebuked Moses, saying, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you planning to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Moses realized his crime was known. 4. The flight to Midian and exile. Fearing Pharaoh, Moses fled eastward into the vast, lonely expanse of the Midian desert, south of Canaan. The shepherd's life in Midian: he encountered the 7 daughters of Ruel Jethro, a local priest. He defended the women from shepherds and was taken in. He married Zipporah, Jethro's daughter, and settled into the mundane, quiet life of a shepherd for the next 40 years. The training in humility, the palace taught him knowledge and power, the desert taught him humility and patience. The desert strips away human ambition, self-reliance, and pride. The life of a shepherd is monotonous, lonely, and requires endless patience, qualities entirely lacking in the impulsive prince of Egypt. The moral lesson here is a key pro tip for spiritual growth. God often requires a long season of obscurity and preparation to break us of the ambition that impedes divine purpose. Part 3. The Call to Destiny. The Burning Bush. Exodus 3-4. After 40 years, when Moses was 80 years old and entirely stripped of his pride, relying on nothing but the movement of his sheep, God decided the time was right. 5. The divine encounter. Exodus 3. Moses led his flock to the far side of the desert and came to Mount Horeb, also called Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. The phenomenon: Moses saw a bush burning with fire, yet the bush was not consumed. This miraculous, supernatural sight was a physical sign of God's nature, divine presence without destruction. Moses turned aside to investigate the command and the holy ground. God called to him from the bush, "Moses, Moses," and commanded him, "Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." The ground was not holy due to a previous event, but became holy simply by the presence of God. The mission: God revealed the specific mission, to go back to Egypt, confront Pharaoh, and bring the Israelites out of slavery to the Promised Land. The moral lesson is, God calls people, not when they feel ready or powerful, but when they are humble enough to submit to the impossible. 6. The revelation of God's name. Moses, stripped of his confidence, asked God, "If I go to the Israelites and say, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' what should I tell them?" The ultimate revelation: God gave the most profound revelation of his nature: "I am who I am." This is what you are to say to the Israelites: "I am has sent me to you." The theological pro tip: the name Yahweh I Am signifies God's absolute self-existence and eternal presence. He is not dependent on anyone or anything, he simply is. This was the ultimate assurance to Moses: the person sending him was not a local deity, but the self-existent, eternal Creator who would be with him at every moment of the impossible task. 7. The reluctant servant. The 80-year-old shepherd was overwhelmed and terrified. He presented a series of excuses, the common mistake of fear overriding faith. "Who am I?" Feeling inadequate. "What if they don't believe me?" Fearing rejection. "I am slow of speech and tongue." Citing personal weakness. God countered every excuse with a promise of divine power, turning the staff into a snake, turning his hand leprous, and a promise of divine partnership, assigning his brother Aaron to speak for him. God had prepared Moses for 80 years. Now, he commissioned him, not based on Moses' ability, but on God's authority. Conclusion: the man prepared by providence. The journey of Moses from the basket to the burning bush is the definitive story of God's redemptive power. It is a transition from a hidden threat to a proud prince, to a fearful fugitive, and finally, to God's chosen prophet. Moses' life teaches us that the greatest leaders are often forged in the furnace of failure and the wilderness of obscurity. When God called him at 80, Moses had lost his confidence in the palace but gained total dependence on the voice from the bush. If this deep dive into Moses' early life has encouraged you to trust God's timing in your own wilderness moments, please hit the like button and subscribe to Know Bible for Self. What phase of Moses' training, the palace or the desert, do you feel you are in right now? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching.